Okay, the Tom Clancy book that started it all. This is my first edition. We'll handle carefully of The Hunt for Red October. So, if you've been following this series of videos, what I've been doing is rereading the Tom Clancy books in timeline order. There was always theories about the author that said, hey, maybe he was getting intelligence agency information. Maybe he was an asset. Maybe he was a psyop. Maybe he was a paid CIA, whatever. And I've been looking at the books objectively now, it's 40 years later, and basically, and saying, was there a way he could have done this without having help? And the books I've read so far this time through were the earlier ones in the Timeline series, but written later in his career. And those were Without Remorse, Patriot Games, Red Rabbit. Fourth one in the timeline is Hunt for Red October, although it was the first written. Um, and it's where we meet Jack Ryan and Ramius. There was, of course, a movie that came out with sort of half of Hollywood in it. That was an excellent film. That was a little bit different than the book, but it was amazing, amazing film. So yeah, this was his debut novel, and right off the bat, he puts you inside a Russian nuclear missile sub as you read the story. He gives you details at the time that were not widely known. Remember, you don't have Google, you don't have the internet. But Tom Clancy himself was an insurance salesman in not far from the Naval Academy, who had an interest in talking to people. So his customers were probably sub guys, right? So he may have gotten people to talk a little bit. He was really well known for doing research. So was that part of it? Was that something you probably could have found? Well, probably. And even in the movie, it opens up inside the Red October, the Russian nuclear missile sub. Hope nobody minds. There will be spoilers if you haven't read the book or seen the movie. It was written it came out in 1984, so I'm going to assume nobody minds. Now, Clancy does also go into detail about the life of a Soviet officer onshore and offshore. And I'm not sure how well known that was at the time, but it is now. And if you look backward, man, he nailed it. So could he have found that out? Maybe, probably. Let's list it under probably. Now, unlike the movie, there was one huge difference in between the two. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but one of the big differences in between the two is we learn what motivates Ramius far more than we do in the film. Now, in the film, Ramius is played by Sean Connery, who's at that point in his career was such an amazing actor, could have convinced you he was ready to peel a banana, and the banana started it, right? So he played a Russian commander with a Scottish accent that was just amazing. But we didn't learn a lot about what sort of motivated Ramius to disappear with this level of equipment and get half of his officers to do it, or most of his officers to do it with him. In the book, we really do. We learn a lot more about that. And we learn a lot about how the state had failed, the state being USSR, had failed Ramius, and he felt they kind of deserved to not, they've disappointed him enough. They've ruined his life in a lot of ways. They cost him his wife. And he was like, nope, they don't deserve to be around. And he went into a lot of history about coming out of World War II and some of the people and what they went through for that. And all that was pretty well known. I mean, the stuff about Ramius was obviously fictional, but a lot of the stuff in there was really well known. But Tom Clancy did a beautiful job of motivating what would have caused a Russian sub commander to do these sorts of things in the book. In the movie, they pass over it very quickly, and it's not as well motivated. But the movie is amazing. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Now, in even up until we haven't even gotten to chapter 4 yet, right? So in chapter 4, we do actually get some of Jack Ryan's backstory, which is basically the outline to Patriot Games. So at least conceptually, which includes details about Jack's honorary knighthood and which was bestowed on him by the British. So Clancy or somebody had a really well thought out plan for the character of Jack Ryan and future stories. So, even as a debut writer, he was like, Jack's going to do this. He's going, he had it kind of mapped out. And as somebody who's written a couple of books, I wish I had that kind of, forethought when I was doing things. But, sometimes you're like, I have a general idea, but I'm really specific. Clancy, man, he had Jack Ryan sort of nailed, sort of figured out. Now, Tom Clancy also said over the years that he really wrote Jack as he saw himself. So he kind of was trying to portray Jack in the way he viewed himself. And to so much so that Tom Clancy's wife was actually an eye surgeon, and Jack Ryan's wife was an eye surgeon. Tom Clancy's wife's family had a little bit of money, and they were, pushing him to do more insurance and stop this silly writing career theory stuff and, work harder on that. And in the book, Jack Ryan had a rich father-in-law who pushed him to do more stuff like his father-in-law did. So yeah, I see some parallels there. So I think he pulled greatly from his life to develop the character of Jack Ryan, which I found kind of interesting. But in this book, what you'll notice is that Tom Clancy, the writer's ego, is not as present. What I mean by that is later on, when you're reading some of the later books, you realize Tom Clancy wants you to know he's the smartest guy in the room, and he's willing to try to sit there, convince you of it at great length that he's the smartest guy in the room. And you don't get that in Hunt for Red October. This is sort of before Tom Clancy's ego really took off. So might make the argument of, was he kind of getting help from somebody or not, based on this book versus others, because the writing style does shift. But yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Now there are a lot of small differences between the book and the film. Remember, it's a 360-page book. From what I understand from people in the movie industry, if you got a page, it's about a minute on film. So, you can't have a 360-minute movie. So they do have to cut some stuff. So there are a lot of small differences in between the book and the movie, which makes the book much better than, in my opinion, than the film, even though the film was outstanding. And those differences are, who figured out what. The movie gives a lot more credit to Jack Ryan than the book does. And a lot of surface fleet stuff goes on. There's even like A-10 attacks and F-15 attacks. They're not really attacks, but if you read the book, there's a whole lot of surface fleet stuff that goes on, and a lot more of Russian fleet versus U.S. fleet things that really kind of get into details that are really interesting. And it's not like the later books where he explains to you exactly how they put rivets in a ship, right? Where he gets down to this ludicrous level of detail. And this one, it's like actually gets into the action more. So it's a much faster pacing than some of his later work, which I find very interesting. Now, the whole point to the series is, was he an asset or wasn't he? Right. So let's dig into a little bit of why this book, I think, is the reason a lot of those rumors started. It was put out originally by the Naval Institute Press that almost never touches fiction, like just about never touches it. And here they were putting out fiction. Now, it was the book industry in 1984, so it's a lot different than now because there were a lot more readers and people were willing to take a few risks. But they also had a first print of like 17,000 copies, which for a debut author is a lot, especially for a company that doesn't do fiction. So they had to market a little differently than they're used to. They had to do all kinds of stuff to kind of get him over those lines. So if you put that in a pile, you're like, okay, it's the Naval Institute Press. They have a close alignment with the intel agencies. It's not a smoking gun, but it's sort of part of the stuff you want to consider. Now, remember, before we get into the details, because I will say that there are things that I can just about be convinced one way or the other. Was he an asset or wasn't he? The book came out in 1984. It was released in October of 1984. Usually, to get a movie deal, you've got to have a script running around. You've got to have agents. You've got to have all kinds of people kind of pushing things in Hollywood. And you've got to have a track record. That's an important part. There's a track record. He had a book deal. He had a movie deal by February 1985, which means the movie deal had to be in the works before the book even came out because he had it signed in February. And I did a little research and realized somebody signed the movie option after reading a galley proof of the book. They didn't even have the final version of it. And they're like, yep, I want this one. We're going to option. The movie comes out in 1990. They began filming in 89. So you got a couple of years to develop a script. You've got to go find approval, recruit cast, producers, everything else. In the 80s, that's lightning fast for a movie of that scale. I mean, maybe you could have done it faster, but that's not slow. Especially to get the level of talent they had involved in that. Because think about it. Hey, yeah, we want Sean Connery. Yeah, Alec Baldwin wasn't Alec Baldwin yet, but like, let's get Sean Connery. Is his schedule clear? Yeah, you got to wait 13 months or for something before his schedule clears up enough to do it. Right. So yeah, it's not like this could have been done. I don't think it could have been done much faster. But it came out March 2nd, 1990, and I remember seeing it in the theater the first time, and it just blew me away. So now, if you remember, and you even look at the movie and the book, both movie and book have these other bits we're about to talk about. There was a lot of details about the nuclear missile, the nuclear deterrence on both sides that were sort of high level details. Now, I'm not talking about things like some things you gotta don't react well to bullets. I can't do Sean Connery. But I'm talking about some of the details of the ships, and they hit both the movie and the book. Some of the sonar work, some of the comms gear. I don't think without having a physicist behind you or some level of number of engineers really say, yeah, you could do this, you could do it. I don't think you could have gotten it, especially the comms gear. There was especially a thing called the Gertrude that I don't think was really. I want to know how he figured that out because that one I don't think at the time was known by anybody. In fact, the Naval Institute Press was asking for permission to put this book out, and a couple of times they got denied. They were asking the Pentagon and some other people, like, "Hey, can we put this out?" And they were using their contacts through the Navy to say, "Hey, look, is there anything in here you guys don't want out in the public?" And they were like, And they were mad, right? They were like, "Who told him about this stuff?" Um, and they just about stopped publication on it a couple times. But then magically, it gets to go through. Now, here's the other fun part. Very shortly after release, some reporter saw it accidentally sitting on President Reagan's desk. Apparently, he was reading it and referred to it as the perfect yarn. Well, I'm sorry, but a debut author going out through the Naval Institute Press with a 17,000 first edition print run is unheard of. Okay, let's put that aside. Winds up on Reagan's desk, and some reporter sees it and asks him about it, and the President of the United States answers, "Come on," as a debut writer. So we're talking Tom Clancy is the luckiest bastard on the face of the earth at this point, right? Now, the book release going to a movie that fast, come on. The Gertrude information, you put all that in a pile, and I'm like, somebody either loved this man, or he had contacts someplace, or somebody was helping him out. Because I don't think anybody else could have gotten this through. He may have just been the luckiest guy to ever walk the face of the earth. But if you start putting all this in a pile together, you look at it like, I don't know, man. It's 5149. Maybe was he on the payroll at the CIA? No, absolutely not. There's no way he was on the payroll. Was he getting information from them? Maybe he was and he didn't know it. I would believe that. Maybe he was getting information that they were like, hey, put this out there. Because remember, this is the height of the Cold War. And in the height of the Cold War, maybe we wanted to tell the Russians a few things through some other means and say, hey, look, haha, we could do this. And have the Russians go, what the hell? I don't think the silent drive would have been that hard to figure out, but everything else in it, I'm like, some of the comms gear, some of the sonar stuff, I'm like, there's no way he can figure that stuff out without a lot of help, unless he's just the luckiest guy on the face of the earth. And then you throw all this other stuff in there, and nobody's that lucky. So I don't know. I'm 5149. Depending on which day you ask me, I could go one way or the other. But I don't think anybody gets that lucky, at least that quickly, without some extra help. Maybe it's just my inner writer being a little bit jealous, but I still don't think anybody gets that lucky. So you decide for yourself. Drop me a comment. Tell me you think I'm insane, one way or the other. But I don't think. I think he had help. I think he had information coming to him. Maybe he didn't realize people were planting ideas in his head. Maybe he did and he denied it. I don't know. But I think he had help from somewhere. So don't forget to hit like and subscribe on the channel. And the next book up is actually one that was written after he passed away, but it's the next one in the timeline series. It's called Red Winter. And then we get into the Cardinal of Kremlin, Clear and Present Danger, Some of All Fears, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to keep plowing through all the books until I run out of Jack Ryan universe books to read, because I want to solve this problem once and for all. We'll talk to everybody on the next video. Have a great week.